Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. A phrase so trite it's practically seared into all of our brains with little thought as to what it actually means or why. When you think of breakfast, what image comes to mind? For me, as an American, it's a huge spread at a diner of pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, toast. But why is this the image that comes to mind for so many of us? A few years ago, I read a pretty disturbing story about bacon and how it solidified its place on the American breakfast plate. I honestly don't remember where it was that I first read this, but it's always been in the back of my mind. And the other day, I overheard someone talking about the concept of breakfast, and it got me thinking back to that story, and I thought, I think it's finally time to make a video about this. That's what we're doing here today, so buckle in because we are taking a journey back in time to discuss how breakfast went from this to this. And if you and I have been lied to and misled about what we should be eating for it. Spoiler alert, we have. I feel like this video is sort of a culmination of a few of my different videos from the last year. It's kind of a mixture between the Aubrey Plaza Got Milk video, the mock meat video, and the girl dinner video in terms of the information that we will uncover and how it's simultaneously mind-blowing and infuriating. And you guys will see why. But first, let's talk about the history of people's relationship to breakfast. In medieval times, only certain people would eat breakfast. This included people who worked early, which actually wasn't that many people, or people who were elderly or sick. Otherwise, there were basically 2 meals per day. Dinner, or what we'd call lunch, and supper, or what we would call dinner. According to historian Ian Mortimer, the Tudors invented modern breakfast as a side effect of inventing the concept of employment. As people increasingly came to work for an employer rather than working for themselves on their own land, they lost control of their time and had to work long, uninterrupted days without sustenance. A big breakfast allowed them to work longer days. The Industrial Revolution and the move from farms to factories formalized the idea of breakfast further, and now it's normal for everyone to eat breakfast before going to work. If we hadn't invented the 9 to 5, we might never have invented breakfast. We're going to talk more about what people historically ate for breakfast, but apparently eggs have always been a pretty common breakfast food, and that's because for people who had hens, there would often be fresh eggs available in the morning. But bacon as a part of breakfast was introduced much later. According to this article in The Guardian, before the late 19th century in the US, breakfast didn't have any particular importance ascribed to it, but all that was changed by a small group of religious fanatics and lobbyists for cereal and bacon companies. We will be getting into that more, but first let's talk about what breakfast used to look like historically and globally. Historically, breakfasts around the world were pretty varied. In ancient Egypt, a peasant breakfast would include soup, beer, bread, and onions. The traditional breakfast believed to have been cooked in ancient Egypt was ful, made of fava beans, baladi bread, falafel, and a mixture of fava beans with onions, garlic, parsley, and coriander. All of this sounds delicious and vegan. Ancient Roman breakfast might be a sampling of bread, cheese, olives, salad, nuts, raisins, and cold meat from the night before, which sounds a lot like girl dinner, but for breakfast. As for the US, Native Americans apparently favored corn porridge for breakfast. Apparently waffles were introduced by pilgrims in 1600s, and it seems like there were a lot of sort of like Johnny cakes or hot cakes, kind of like early versions of pancakes. Up until the 1800s in America, there hadn't been a prescribed list of breakfast foods. People would mostly just eat whatever they had on hand from the night before. In the 1800s, a farmer's breakfast became more common. This consisted of eggs and cold cuts of meat, basically a big breakfast to prepare you for a day of manual labor. By the late 1800s, apparently indigestion was becoming a growing concern. As we were moving into the Second Industrial Revolution, there were less people working on farms and more people working in factories and offices, so jobs where they'd be sitting down all day as opposed to standing and moving around. Eating a big, hearty breakfast wasn't really necessary for these workers, and so they were seeking something lighter. Enter a healthier living fad. Followers of the Seventh-day Adventist religion started opening up sanatoriums, which as far as I can tell were kind of a mixture between a hospital and a health retreat. Connections donations to the Seventh-day Adventist Church infused a sense of religious morality into ideas of healthy eating. If you watched my mock meat video, you'll be familiar with the story of John Harvey Kellogg and how he and his brother created breakfast cereal at the Battle Creek Sanatorium at the end of the 19th century, as well as creating the earliest known mock meat in America, Protos. But apparently breakfast cereal was actually created with a specific goal in mind other than physical health, which was apparently to repress sexual desires as part of a puritanical agenda with the goal of leading America away from sin. In fact, throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century, we see the proliferation of the clean living movement, which was kind of a jumble of all sorts of wackadoo, in my opinion, ways of thinking. The movement was influenced by things like religion, eugenics, and moral superiority. In regard to breakfast, it claimed that eating bacon, eggs, pancakes, and coffee were too indulgent. Breakfast cereals were offered as more of a pure and light alternative. While some of the earliest breakfast cereals were pretty mild in flavor, like corn flakes or grape nuts, manufacturers quickly began trying to stand out with the addition of sweeteners, flavors, and colors, to the point where we now have the insanely ridiculous spectacle that is the breakfast cereal aisle in the grocery store. Using moralizing rhetoric to sell the idea of a healthy breakfast in the 19th century changed how people thought about the meal. The idea that if you ate a lighter, healthier breakfast, you were going to be more efficient and productive at work added another moralizing layer. The cliche that breakfast is the most important meal and one that includes very specific foods developed from those early days of cereal marketing. It was a combination of fear of indigestion, religious moralization, and advertising that helped push the idea of breakfast as the most important meal of the day. But it was a campaign to sell more bacon that really solidified the idea. Here we go. What happened is that in the 1920s, a man named Edward Bernays, who was a PR expert working at the Beechnut Company, exploited all the moralization and health fears around breakfast to help the company push its bacon. We're going to talk about exactly how he did that, but first, a few things about Edward. He is now considered a PR pioneer, referred to as the father of public relations, and not incidentally, he was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And according to this Reddit post, so take it with a grain of salt, he is also the great uncle of the founder of Netflix. He is famous for many successful marketing campaigns, including marketing cigarettes to women under the guise of empowerment and liberation. By all accounts, he used his uncle Freud's theories of unconscious psychological motivations as a PR tactic. Up until the 1920s, Americans had mainly been eating toast and coffee or cereal and coffee, maybe orange juice, for breakfast, so pretty light breakfasts. With the mission of helping the Beechnut Company sell more bacon, what Bernays did is he got a doctor to agree with and write a statement that a protein-rich, heavy breakfast of bacon and eggs was healthier than a light breakfast. So there's really some stretching of the truth PR magic happening here. The narrative being presented was maximizing the high protein aspect of eggs and bacon, but minimizing their harmful aspects like their fat, cholesterol, and sodium levels. Also, the doctor he went to was conveniently the on-staff doctor of his PR firm. Yeah, let's just have a doctor on staff and he'll tell me whatever I tell him to say. Guy's a genius. Bernays then sent the doctor's statement to around 5,000 other doctors, asking them for their signatures, and he got them. He then got newspapers to publish the results of his petition as if it was a scientific study. That brought bacon and eggs back into fashion and added more weight to the idea that breakfast was not only very important, but medically recommended. The tactic worked. Bacon sales for Beechnut increased, and we've been eating bacon for breakfast ever since. This really makes me think about media literacy, and as much as it's difficult to have media literacy today, think about how much harder it would have been back then when it wouldn't have even occurred to people that a newspaper could be lying to them, or that something they see in a newspaper, especially endorsed by 5,000 doctors, was a tactic or misleading or deceptive in some way. And that lack of understanding and that manipulation, if you could call it that, which I think we can, has carried on this lasting legacy. Today, 70% of bacon is eaten at breakfast. Bacon and eggs is an iconic American combo, all thanks to Edward Bernays. Heather Arndt Anderson, who wrote a book called Breakfast: A History, makes a really interesting point in the Guardian article about how something about breakfast naturally lends itself to moral judgment. People make their lifestyle change at New Year, and every morning is like a small New Year's Day, a chance to start things off in the right direction. So if you have cold pizza for breakfast, it says what sort of person you are. There's something to be said about how much food guilt there is in the world, and certainly specifically in the US. Reading about the histories of these clean living and puritanical movements in the US really puts today's diet culture into perspective. I know people accuse vegans of coming across as judgmental of other people's food choices. I think from an animal morality standpoint, there's obviously an argument to be made there, and something that I feel very strongly about. But moral judgment aside, it bothers me that so many people base their diet, what they put into their body multiple times a day, around lies and manipulation, and are essentially falling prey to tried and true insidious PR tactics. Of course, people don't realize they're being manipulated, and that's why it's so insidious, and that's why I dedicate so much of my channel to exposing this manipulation. There's a really great Adam Ruins Everything episode about bacon. You can watch it on YouTube, I'll link it below. It's less than 5 minutes. It's very informative, it's very shocking and mind-blowing. Unsurprisingly, tons of lobbying money has been thrown at US government organizations to suppress information about how harmful meat products are to the public. The episode also points out the fact that processed meat, like bacon, is classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. In the episode, there's a joke where this guy says something like, "You mean I've been basing my entire personality around loving bacon because I've basically been manipulated to do so?" I talk about this with cheese a lot, how so many people make liking certain animal products almost part of their identity. It's almost like they think they've come to it on their own, like they're special because they've discovered something, when really, in the case of bacon, it's a narrative that's been spoon-fed to us for an entire century. This is obviously the case with cheese as well. I'm really not sure what to make of all this or what the bottom line is. One thing I find interesting is that we've been conditioned to see a narrow set of foods as breakfast foods, and eating anything else for breakfast seems weird and gross and wrong. Even though I personally love breakfast, it seems like at the end of the day, breakfast is not actually the most important meal in any meaningful way. Just like with all meals, it's up to the individual when they eat, what they eat, how much they eat. There's no prescription for breakfast, but people were led to believe that there is. Let me know what you guys think of all this. I'm sure most of you won't be surprised to see yet another animal product sneakily marketed to the masses. To be honest, I didn't really get too deep into researching the egg lobby and their role in pushing eggs for breakfast, but I'm sure there has been a bunch of that. I did take a tiny peek at the Egg Checkoff's 2022 annual report. I love it when checkoff programs make it so easy for us to see what they've been up to. And the very first achievement that they tout was driving awareness around the benefits of eggs through a partnership with Joy Bauer, Today Show's nutrition and healthy lifestyle expert and best-selling author. We just talked about the Today Show in my Girl Dinner video, and if you guys recall, I said that I would not be surprised if the dairy checkoff had some kind of deal with the Today Show, and now we have confirmation that the egg checkoff definitely has a deal with the Today Show, and this just adds more fuel to my fire. My intuition is just always right when it comes to these animal ag partnerships. Let me know what you guys eat for breakfast. You guys have seen in the past what I eat, although I will say my breakfasts have shifted and there's some new types of breakfast in the mix. Maybe I'll do an updated video about my weird vegan breakfast. That is it for today. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new. I have been a little bit MIA the last few weeks, and I have a community post up right now that talks about why and where I'm going to be the next couple weeks. I have a lot of exciting stuff coming up that I can't wait to share with you guys, so subscribe so that you don't miss anything, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!